Hi there, friends. This is Paul. Before we get started on the podcast, I just wanted to take a quick moment to express my gratitude to everyone who has supported this podcast. I really do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank you for listening. You there in the headphones, whether you're out there for a run, at the grocery store, walking the dog, driving on our cross country road trip, wherever you are. Thank you for being part of this podcast. I really appreciate it. I appreciate Chris Creamer, who gave me the opportunity to write for his website starting in 2014, something I'm still doing today and really enjoying. Everyone who has rated and reviewed the podcast on Apple Podcasts, that's an act of kindness and generosity that I truly appreciate. My fellow podcasters and content creators out there, one of the great surprises to me in doing a podcast has been the support that I have felt from other podcasters, other content creators, people who love the sport of minor league baseball like I do, really inspiring people who are creating great content, but also who are just so genuine in their support of one another. That has really been something that I'm very grateful for. Also, I'm really very grateful to the people who have come on as guests on the podcast, the teams, the front office personnel, the supporters of minor league baseball in other facets. And I'm incredibly grateful to the talented designers who create these amazing logos that we love talking about and that bring us so much pleasure as fans of the sport. Todd Radom was the guest on my second episode. Jason Klein of Brandiose, I've already recorded several episodes where he's going to be appearing in the very near future. And Dan Simon, I have to say a very particular thank you to Dan Simon, who has supported this podcast in an incredible way. He reached out to me and offered to create a logo for this podcast. It was such an amazing experience engaging in the conversations with Dan that led to the thing that he created that I just absolutely adore. I really love the logo that he created for this podcast. I'm so happy with it. And I'm so incredibly grateful to Dan for supporting this project in that way. It really means the world to me. So I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy the logo that Dan created for it. Let's get to the podcast. Hi there. Welcome to Baseball by Design. I am Paul Caputo, minor league baseball correspondent for sportslogos.net, broadcasting live from the Helmet Sunday Hall of Fame in my basement. I'm very happy to be joined by someone who I've spoken to many, many times over the years for articles on sports logos. Dan Simon is, I think saying prolific would be putting it lightly. Dan has developed hundreds of logos, including nearly 100 for minor league baseball teams, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. In our interview conversation, Dan, you just used the phrase from sock puppets to Super Bowl. And I think that really gives people the scope of the work that you have done and the type of work that you've done. But I'm looking at the map on your website of the teams that you have designed logos for all over the country, and the wide diversity of minor league baseball that is represented by your work. So first of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad to be having one of these conversations that we can record and put out there for the world, because I've always enjoyed our conversations so much that, now getting to do this for the podcast is a real pleasure for me.
Well, it's a pleasure for me as well. I always love talking with you about the brand identities that have been done here at Studio Simon. And anytime I have the opportunity to talk with you about another one, I'm going to jump at that opportunity.
Just to give an idea of the range of the work that you've done, I'm going to pick out from your website. I'm just picking out some of my favorite logos in minor league baseball that are all your handiwork here. The Hillsboro Hops, the Modesto Nuts, the Great Falls Voyagers, the Cedar Rapids Colonels, the Toledo Mud Hens, the Hudson Valley Renegades, the Charleston River Dogs, the Savannah Bananas. And I'm picking and choosing from a bunch of little flags that you have here. One that I have to mention because I just love the story so much is the Joliet Slammers, who are named for the famous prison in Joliet, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, made famous, of course, in the movie The Blues Brothers, one of just the cleverest brands out there. So I want to start with, obviously there are trends right now in minor league baseball towards sort of more cartoony, more fun, more sort of kid friendly. And you certainly have that in your scope of work, I mean, we already mentioned the Savannah Bananas, the raccoon-based Hudson Valley Renegades, the Modesto Nuts with their sort of cartoon nut logos, but you also do a very serious logo as well, and you take to heart the sort of professionalism of the minor league baseball player when you create a minor league logo identity. And one of the examples I think of is the Memphis Redbirds, which actually won one of Chris Creamer's Creamer Awards on the website sportslogos.net for being the best rebrand of the year in, I think, 2018. I hope I don't have that wrong. The question I want to ask for you is, what informs that process of deciding, okay, we're going with something, full-blown minor league baseball silly, like the Savannah Bananas? You also worked on the Burlington Sock Puppets project, which is a great one, people love, or something, more serious. The new logo for the Hudson Valley Renegades the primary logo doesn't have the raccoon in it. Certainly the Memphis Redbirds is a more serious brand. The St. Paul Saints, which I know is an older one, but just purely typographic. So the decision to go sort of cartoony or more serious, where's the genesis in that part of the process?
I once had a good friend of mine who's actually a competitor of mine as well. His name is Joe Bosak. He once told me a story about something that happened when he was up for a collegiate brand identity project. And he got that job, and the client told him the reason they hired him is because the other firm that was up for the job that had spoken with them prior to Joe speaking with them had gone in there and told the university what they felt was best for the university. When Joe went in there, he asked them what they're trying to achieve, as opposed to saying, here's what you need. And that really resonated with me. And that informed, frankly, every sports branding project I have done since hearing that story. So the first thing I do when I speak with a team is I want to know where they've been, I want to know where they currently are, and I want to know where they want to go. And I need to understand what their goals are and what their vision is, what they're trying to achieve. And then my job is to give them the tools they need to achieve their goals and realize their vision. And if that is as Jesse Cole, the owner of the Savannah Bananas, said it, a kick-ass banana, then that's what I'm going to deliver to them. If what they want is something more traditional, then that's what I'm going to deliver to them. I'd like to think there's a common thread that is consistent through all of my work. And I'd like to think that that's quality and the best work in the business. But I hope I don't have a particular style where you look at it and you go, that's definitely what I see from Studio Simon every time.
Well, that's an interesting thing, right? Because as a designer, you talk about developing a visual voice, but also, not wanting to appear formulaic or templated. I mean, I think there are some logos where you look at it and you say, when I look at the Hickory Crawdads and you say Dan Simon did that, I say, yeah, I see that. I see that in the eyes. I see it in there. You definitely have an aesthetic, but it's certainly not a template and certainly not formulaic. Where's the line between your visual voice and the team's vision?
Well, having done a wide range of and large quantity of sports brand identities, over time, there will be some similarities between one identity and the other, just because it's my hand doing it. However, I'm also charged with making any brand identity should be unique, and each team is unique. So the brand identities for these teams should be unique. And so I try to bring something unique to each of the identities, something that differentiates it from one I have done previously.
Is there an identity that you've done that you think people would be surprised to know was your work?
Well, it all depends on what they know of my work.
Mhm.
So there are, like you focus mainly on minor league baseball, collegiate summer league baseball. And so I would assume, even though you've been to my website, you've focused on those quote unquote minor league baseball identities that I've done. So a lot of people don't know that I've done 2 Super Bowl logos. I've actually worked on 4 Super Bowls and was fortunate enough to have 2 of those chosen for the actual brand identity, event identity for Super Bowls 36 and 37. I have done, heck, before I got into sports branding, I was living in Los Angeles and working at a design studio that largely did entertainment design. So I've done movie posters. I've done board game packaging. So there's a ton of work that people would never imagine came from, again, the same hand that has delivered so many of these fun family entertainment branded minor league baseball identities.
Sure. Well, and I was, I love noodling around on these websites, and I was looking also at your commemorative logos, the 125th anniversary of the Louisville Slugger. Certainly that is, you see Louisville Slugger's voice shining through there, right? Like, so if you show me that logo, I wouldn't have picked that out as Dan Simon's work, right? And then also I really like this one for the Metrodome. May it rest in peace. Site of what I still to this day think was the best World Series ever played, and I can say that because it doesn't involve my Phillies. So
I'm assuming you're talking about the one where Kirby Puckett famously said he's going to put the team on his back, and he did just that.
1991, absolutely, yeah. That was. Now I have to say, I was, as a Phillies fan, I was rooting against the Braves, so maybe that's why I like that one so much. But as a designer, I would think it must be fun to happen across your work just out there in the environment. How often are you just, are you traveling for work, or you're out there just walking around and you see someone wearing something that you created?
How often does that happen? It's happened enough. It hasn't happened so many times that I don't get excited about it anymore. It's always a thrill for me to see something I've done on somebody who doesn't know that the person standing next to them or who just walked by them is the person who did that. I get a big kick out of that.
I'm sure that must be really fun. How often do you get to go to the ballparks for the teams whose identities you've created?
Unfortunately, not enough. The reason for that is because I've done identities for teams from coast to coast, north to south, all over the United States, and it's hard for me to get to all of them because some of them are far away. So, but that said, as a baseball fan, I'll take any opportunity to go to a baseball game. So if I happen to be somewhere where there's a baseball team and a game being played, whether I design the identity or not, I'm going to a baseball game there. And if it is a team for which I've designed the identity, better yet.
Well, then you get them on the horn and you demand to throw out the first pitch, I assume. Yeah.
You know what? That's always been, I was just listening to your podcast and I'm sorry, the baseball bucket list podcast.
Oh yeah. That's Anna D. Tommaso for the baseball bucket list podcast.
And one of the questions Anna asks is what's on your baseball bucket list? What are those things you want to do that you haven't done yet? And for me, I had 2 bucket list. Well, now it's not going to do any good if Anna wants me to be a guest on her podcast, because I'm answering the question on your podcast. But since you brought it up, the 2 things were, I always wanted a championship ring, and I always wanted to throw out a first pitch. Now, but I didn't want to ask to do that because it's just not the same. So I wanted it to happen organically. And fortunately for me, because of some great clients I have, the ring has happened twice now. And I never asked for it. They just felt that my contributions were important enough that that I deserved a ring. And what's interesting is one was a team that when we actually, I'll say what it was. It was the Memphis Redbirds.
Okay.
And when we did that rebrand, the inaugural season with that brand identity, they set a franchise record for victories and had a great year, not just on the field, but at the box office. And Peter Freund, the owner of that team, felt that the new identity contributed to all the good things that happened that year. And when he was ordering championship rings, he called me up and asked me what size ring I had. And I was so honored that he would consider what I do to have had a part in the success of the team, whether it's on field or in the stands or both. What an honor that was. And then on the other side of the coin, more recently, the owners of the Visalia Rawhide, who are no longer the current owners, it was their last season of ownership. And I did that identity, I don't know, 15, 18? No, I think I did that when I was still in Los Angeles. So that was over 20 years ago I did that. And their last year of ownership, which would have been, I believe, 2019, they won the first California League title of in their years of ownership. And so 20 something years after doing that identity, they considered me still like a member of the team.
That's great.
And got me a championship ring. So those two meant a heck of a lot to me. The opening day, the throwing out the first pitch hasn't happened. And I don't know that if it did happen, I would do it, because I threw so much batting practice to my son Casey and his teams that I tore my rotator cuff.
Oh no.
I've had rotator cuff surgery, and it was the recovery from that surgery was so painful that I never want to go through that surgery again. So I've not thrown a baseball in about 7 or 8 years because I don't want to risk damaging my rotator cuff again. So
yeah,
if the team asked me to do it, I might say, you know what, I have to think about it, because I still really want to do it, but I don't know if that's my story.
We have to keep that sketching and mouse clicking shoulder, healthy for you there. We can't have get you knocked out of designing logos with a torn rotator cuff. So I have to say, as you know from listening to Anna's podcast, Baseball Bucket List, that I have gotten to throw out the first pitch one time, and it was at an Idaho Falls Chukars game. And the Idaho Falls Chukars are another one of your brands. And that was a fun one to talk about too, with the whole double entendre of the name Chukar being someone who throws a baseball, and also the bird Chukar, Chukar. So I have friends who are big birders, which is not a hobby that I've gotten into over time, but they love that name in particular because they think that little bird-based play on words is really fun. So,
well, and that's an example of, in that case, the team came to me with that name. And frankly, and again, that one was done a number of years ago as well. And back then, most of the time, the great majority of the time, teams came to me already either with if it was a new identity as opposed to a rebrand of an existing team where they weren't changing their name. If it was a new identity, most of the time they already knew what they wanted to be called. More recently, I would say at least half of the projects I do involve working with the teams on coming up with a new name. And that's actually one of my favorite parts of the process. I love doing the research and learning about the cities and the teams themselves. Whereas in the past, it was just like, oh, I'm just doing a logo, the name's given to me, and you don't get to do that in-depth, that deep dive into the city and the team, which it's something I really enjoy.
Well, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is about your process, and I'm sure it's far too detailed to answer, quickly on a podcast. But can you give, sort of a sense of, how, from start to finish, when you're asked to create a new identity from scratch, working with a team, what does that process look like?
Well, part of the process can involve, and sometimes does involve, visiting the city and trying to meet as many people. I often ask the teams to help me with that. Like, who do you think would be somebody it would be beneficial for me to meet with to get a true understanding of your town, your city. But I've also found that it's not always possible. And frankly, during COVID, people weren't traveling. And I think I did 2 identities during COVID, and you couldn't go to the cities. So one of the great things is everything is on the internet. And if there's something about the city that's not on the internet, then I will go so far as to say that it likely would not be something that would be a good direction for an identity for that team. Because if it's so obscure that somebody hasn't put it out there already, then it's something that's probably not going to work for that team. Now, that's not to say that something that people from the outside don't know about that city, it's not to say that wouldn't be a good direction for the identity. A perfect example is, you mentioned the Great Falls Voyagers. The reason now, for those who are not familiar with the identity, that has a ET theme, an extraterrestrial theme to it. And the reason for that was back in the 1950s, I believe it was, and the general manager of the baseball team in Great Falls was going out it was, I guess, the mid-morning to check on the field, because it had rained either overnight or the day before, and they had a game that day. And so he went out to the field just to check on its playability. And when he went out there, he saw something in the sky, a flash that was not like it wasn't a bird, it wasn't a plane, wasn't Superman, and he had I believe it was not a Super 8 camera. What would it be? A 16 millimeter camera, whatever. He had whatever the type of film camera, portable film camera somebody might have back then. It was in his car. He ran to his car, got it out, and got something like 16 or 18 seconds of footage of this thing in the sky. Now, unfortunately, the footage is a little blurry and a little shaky, both because of the quality of the camera and maybe his excitement at the time. And that is, I believe, to this day, the longest filmed sighting of a UFO. And now, whether it was a UFO or not, well, it is a UFO because it remains unidentified.
It is unidentified, exactly.
But what that was, they don't know. But to this day, not only is it the longest film footage of a UFO sighting, it's still one of the most famous UFO sightings in UFO history. And now I discovered that in the research I did when I was working with the team trying to come up with name possibilities. And I think I can safely say very few people, except for UFO fans, know that Great Falls has that connection to UFOs. But it made for a really good identity because it's a unique story specific to that city.
Well, so first of all, I named it earlier when I was going through my list of the brands that I really like. I actually got to go to a Great Falls Voyagers game this summer on a road trip with my kids through Montana. And I remember writing that article for sportslogos.net. And while you were talking, I called it up. You were spot on with the dates. It was 1950. The general manager of the team who caught the footage was Nicholas Mariana. and it is called the Mariana UFO incident. So it is, like you say, it is pretty famous within UFO circles. And I like that logo just because I mean, I like a lot of things about it. I do like the little green guys, the little orbit. I was devastated when I went to a Great Falls Voyagers game this summer when I could not get the dad hat with the orbit character on it. They had these gray hats with the green orbit character, and they were sold out. I almost bought one online before I went, and I thought I'll just wait till I get to the game, and they were sold out. And so to this day, I have not been able to find that hat still. But it's that logo outlasted the Las Vegas 51s, which just by virtue of being a AAA team, probably more people knew about and really liked. I think people were probably sad to see that 51s logo go. But yeah, the Mariana UFO incident was such a great story for a nickname, right? Like it's such a great sort of foundation for a brand. It's unique to the place. It's a fun story. It gives you all sorts of freedom to create this fun brand. And then even with that, you have the double entendre of the European, the French Canadian, I should say, the voyageurs who explored the upper Midwest and the West in that area, because the voyageur with a U culture is certainly part of that brand. So that's absolutely, I mean, I love that you brought that one up, because this is, I had no idea which of your brands we were going to talk about when we started this conversation, just because there's so many of them, but that Voyagers one is certainly a great one.
Yeah, it's and the fact that people in the city can claim that because it happened in their city, but that it had a direct tie to the baseball team as well,
right?
Just made it the perfect direction to go.
Yeah, it really was. Is there a brand, and I'm not going to ask you, I know that you must get this question all the time, what's your favorite one, right? Like, I'm not going to ask you that question. I know there's not an answer to it, but is there a brand, or are there some of the brands that you've created that you feel you are best known for?
Well, I'd have to say the Savannah Bananas, because they are, well, that being said, that doesn't mean people know I created that. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who might have seen the logo and might have loved the logo. They don't know who created that, but because of the phenomenon that team has become, it transcends collegiate summer league baseball branding. Most collegiate summer league teams do not get exposure beyond their immediate market. And the reason for that is, first of all, it's not professional baseball. For those who don't know, it's played by current college players who can't be professionals because they would lose their amateur status. So they're still in college, need somewhere to, the college baseball season ends in late May or early June. If you make it to the postseason, maybe go to the College World Series. When does that play? I think it ends around mid-June. So after that, there's still the whole summer to go. And these players need to keep playing baseball. And that's what these collegiate summer leagues are for. Jesse Cole, the owner of the Savannah Bananas, it's not just baseball that goes on there. He is the P.T. Barnum of professional sports.
Yeah.
In the mold of Bill Veeck, the former owner of the St. Louis Browns, the Chicago White Sox, who's also responsible for planting the ivy on the wall at Wrigley Field.
No kidding. What a great little tidbit.
Right. So the Savannah Bananas have gotten mentioned on major networks, on ESPN, which I guess is a major network. They've had newspaper articles written about them, magazine articles. They're a phenomenon. And thankfully, that's what I love, is when my work can get the exposure it gets, because of, frankly, I don't take credit at all for the success of the Bananas. That's Jesse Cole. That's his team, the players, the staff. He's a different operator than anyone out there, and he made something I created famous.
Well, so this phenomenon with collegiate summer level teams marketing themselves beyond their own market really speaks to the state of minor league baseball right now, right? Like, a lot of teams are creating brands that they know will be sold to people who will likely never get to a game. And at the collegiate summer level, and I understand that these are not your logos, all of them, but there are collegiate summer level teams like the Portland Pickles, most recently the Dub C Fish Sticks, the Carolina Disco Turkeys, the Burlington Sock Puppets, which is one of yours and that is widely beloved out there in the world. I should mention the Danville Otterbots as well. These collegiate summer level teams are very much creating brands that with the intention of selling their gear to people who will likely never get to one of their games. So, certainly these teams out there creating brands, marketing them nationwide, and then sort of promoting the fact, hey, we've sold, t-shirts to 37 states, that sort of thing. And I think that that's something that, the minor league baseball at large discovered, 25 years ago with the Carolina Mudcats, right? Like, hey, we can create brands. And obviously, the Carolina Mudcats are just one example, right? The Toledo Mud Hens, the Lansing Lugnuts. A lot of these teams out there realized we can sell a brand without selling tickets. And that must inform the work that you do in creating a brand. When you're creating something for a new team, let's use the Fredericksburg Nationals as an example. No, let's not use the Nationals as an example because they're named for their parent club. I do love the Mary Washington logo that you did for the Nationals, but let's pick a team. Here you go, great one, the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers, which is just has been so well received. That logo has just been so popular. I have a Cannon Ballers t-shirt. I can't imagine I'm going to get to Kannapolis anytime soon unless my baseball palooza road trip takes me there. I bought a Kannapolis Cannon Ballers cap because the logo is so much fun. The Dale Earnhardt mustached human cannonball who's flying through the air, this fun character, this sort of cool brand. I bought that because it's a fun brand without ever, I'm not necessarily supporting the Chicago White Sox, whose affiliate they are, right? Like I'm supporting a team that came up with a great brand that I think is fun to wear around. So here's me with one of my long questions again. It's what I do on this podcast. When you're creating a brand like the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers, and let's just talk about that one, are you envisioning it being purchased, it being out there in the world with people who will never get to a Cannon Ballers game?
Yeah, certainly. The main goal of any brand identity that I develop is something I mentioned earlier, which is I need to deliver the tools that the team needs to achieve their goals. That's the main goal of any brand identity, but also equally as important is that the brand identity I create resonates with that specific community. Mm-hmm. Every team wants to sell as much merchandise as possible. That should go without saying. But I find that there are some brand identities out there, and I'm not going to name them, that have been done that were developed specifically to sell as much merchandise as possible, to potentially sell to like people in all 50 states and beyond. Mm-hmm. That in doing that, they were not concerned about how it would resonate with that team's fans and the community in that city. And those are not successful identities. Yes, they'll sell merchandise, but that's not what branding is. That's not the most important thing in branding. If it appeals to people beyond your immediate geographic boundaries, that's great. And that is something, yes, I do try to achieve with every identity I do, but not at the expense of it resonating with that team's fans the most.
Sure. No, and I think that's a great approach for sure. With the, since we're talking about the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers here, with every minor league baseball logo rebrand, I feel like there's this arc of sort of pushback from the people who have nostalgia for the old name. The Cannon Ballers replaced the Kannapolis Intimidators. The Intimidators were sort of forced into changing their nickname because they, it was so closely tied to Dale Earnhardt and his estate that they didn't have full ownership over it and the ability, the flexibility that they needed. So here comes you, a new designer for a new team name, created this very successful logo that, sort of nationwide is very well received. But locally, there must have been pushback. I can only assume that there was pushback for people who had nostalgia for the old nickname. So how do you, as a designer, how do you deal with that sort of emotional component of a fan base that had an emotional tie to an old brand that your new brand is replacing?
Well, it goes beyond, it certainly is an emotional tie, but it even goes beyond that. The reality is it's human nature to be averse to change. Mm-hmm. I don't like change. Nobody really, well, the only time you're going to like change is when there's something really bad. But with regard to sports branding, anytime you replace something that has been in a community for a decent amount of time, there's going to be pushback against changing that. Mm-hmm. And as long as you can accept that, then you take that pushback with a grain of salt. Sure. With the Kannapolis identity, they had to change that identity. The people there love Dale Earnhardt. They loved him when he was alive. They love him even more since he's passed, and they will always love him there. He was born and raised in Kannapolis, and he's there. He is as native of a native of a son as a native son gets, and people did not want that identity changed, but it had to, because that team did not own their own name. The Intimidators were named the Intimidators because Dale Earnhardt was not only Kannapolis' native son, but he was a part owner of the team. Mm-hmm. And the Intimidator was his nickname. So that's why they were named the Intimidators. And everyone there, of course, loved that name. But the team couldn't own that name because it was his nickname. Sure. And that tied their hands with regard to some marketing and merchandising things. And they bottom line is they needed to have an identity that they owned hook, line, and sinker, and both the name and the logos. So I went into that project with knowing all of that. And when that identity was, when we were creating that identity, when I say we, here at Studio Simon and the team, it was very much a collaborative effort. Mm-hmm. I was very concerned about what the response would be to that, because I really felt like anything that we did was not necessarily going to be well received, because it wasn't the Intimidators. It almost seemed like a no-win situation. Mm-hmm. And when that identity was unveiled, the team did a great job of unveiling it. They did something called the big reveal, and they had a 18 to 20 minute video put together that talked about the history of the city of Kannapolis, the history of baseball in the city. And they got what they did is they've got a movie theater there called the Gem Theater, which is a wonderful old wonderfully restored theater that just recently got put on the National Register of Historic Places.
Oh, cool.
One of those one-off movie theaters that you would see in small towns. And they showed this video at the theater to, I think the theater held like 800 or 900 people, and it was packed. There was not a seat available. It was the desire for people to be part of that was so big that they then put large screens outside the theater for the overflow, because there was only so much room in the theater. So you had like the whole city of Kannapolis there to see this unveiling. And in the video, they eventually got to the part where they were talking about Dale Earnhardt, and the theater erupted in applause.
Right.
And I'm sitting there, I'm up in the balcony taking this all in, and I'm thinking, oh no, these people they're expecting Dale Earnhardt.
Uh-huh.
But we're not actually giving them Dale Earnhardt. However, the identity was created in the spirit of Dale Earnhardt. You know, he was somebody that went, pardon the expression, balls out all the time. And that's what a human cannonball does. You know, they're literally laying it all on the line, putting their life on the line. Each time they get in that cannon, you don't know if things are going to go wrong, in the same way that Dale Earnhardt put it all on the line in every race that he was in. And so that's why that character was chosen. And also, as you pointed out earlier, you know, that mustache was done as an homage to, is that homage or homage? Homage.
I think they're both allowed. You can use either one.
to Dale Earnhardt. But just when I knew the part in the video was going to come where the logo was going to be unveiled, I had no idea what the reaction was going to be, because I didn't know if what I did was going to come across, all the things I meant to happen. I didn't know if that was going to come across to them. And then the logo comes and the theater erupted, and they're cheering, they're applauding. And I literally had chills running up my spine. And as I walked out of the theater, I had a number of people come up to me and just say, they didn't know who I was going into the theater, but I was also in the video. Okay. So now people see, oh, you're the guy in the video. Right. And I had people come up to me and just say, thank you.
Oh, cool.
And that meant so much to me, because those were the people I was doing it for, and it resonated with them. It was one of the greatest moments of my career doing what I do.
Well, that is a great story. Yeah, it gives me chills just hearing you tell that story, right? Like that's to land something like that, you know, in front of a live audience. God, that's to me, that's terrifying, right? Like I mean, even this podcast, I go back and edit it before I put it out there in the world, right? So like to be there for a live unveil of your own work like that, you know, I'm glad it was well received, as it should have been, right? Because as I said, it's, you know, all of these, I keep looking at these logos and thinking that one's my favorite, that one's my favorite. And, you know, I can't believe we haven't talked about the Hillsborough hops yet either, right? Because that's another one that is just, you know, a classic, an instant classic, as it were, sort of a new classic. I want to ask you about you, Dan Simon, the baseball fan. You said you're a fan, you go to a game. I do the same thing. I try to plan work trips around you know, where minor league baseball might be happening, you know, certainly coordinate it with schedules. You are in Louisville, Kentucky, just down the street from the Louisville Bats and the Louisville Slugger Museum. Do you have a major league team?
I do, and I'm going to apologize in advance, because this is one of those teams that that many people hate. They're the evil empire, the New York Yankees.
All right,
but I hope people will cut me some slack, because first of all, I was born in the Bronx, which is where the Yankees play. So, sure. So that's, I grew up first 7 years of my life in New York City, then suburban New Jersey, just, you know, 20 or so miles outside of New York. My dad still, so I grew up there, you know, that was my hometown team. But I am old enough that when I was a boy and became a Yankee fan, the Yankees were horrible. One of the players on the team just recently died. I think he died last year. His name was Horace Clark. And he was their second baseman. He was good, but not very good. Right. And that could be said about virtually everyone on the Yankee team from 1964 until 1976, which was this 12-year span where they did not only did they not make it to a World Series those 12 years, but they were horrible. It was the darkest years of the Yankees franchise.
So you earned your fandom.
Yeah, that was not a good team that became my team. They later then won a whole bunch of more championships. Obviously, before they had won, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle years, they'd won a ton, and they've since won a bunch. But that embarrassment of riches was not what was going on when I became a fan.
Well, I think that's funny, and it certainly does sound like you earned your fandom. But no one ever has to apologize to me for who they root for, right? Like I just, it's this fan gatekeeper mentality of the baseball fan telling other baseball fans who they can and cannot root for has always been a little weird to me. So so never apologize for being a Yankees fan. I'm a Phillies fan, and the Yankees don't even make my top 5 of most hated teams. So they're in a different league, a different division. I've got other teams I can focus my ire on. Dan, I know we are going to speak again, and I'm always so grateful for how generous you are with your time, your insight, the great work that you're doing for minor league baseball. I certainly think that the work that you have done over the years is a big part of why minor league baseball branding is so popular right now. And the landscape has really shifted for minor league baseball in the last couple decades. And, your work has been such a big part of that. And I'm glad to get to have these conversations with you. And I thank you for your time. I will ask you, where can people find you? Where are your preferred online venues for people to find you?
Well, my website is studiosimon.net, and I believe .com gets you there too.
Okay.
So studiosimon whatever you want to, well, not whatever, but .net or .com. And then I'm on Instagram, studio_Simon.
Dan, thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Paul, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be in an industry that is worthy of a podcast devoted to what I do.
Well, I hope that the podcast itself is worthy of the industry. So I thank you for that.
So good.
Thank you. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Dan. Hang on, everyone. It's time for the Marvel-style post-credit sequence. Super happy to be joined by Zach Gold right now, a.k.a. MLB Paint, who has made a huge splash on Twitter recently with his interpretations of minor league baseball logos and also illustrations of players. Zach, hello. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You're a huge hit on Twitter right now, and you're getting that thing that like everyone on minor league baseball Twitter covets, which is attention from the teams themselves. You're getting all sorts of requests from teams to have the MLB Paint treatment of their logo. I know a lot of teams are following you and retweeting you, and I'm watching your follower numbers just tick up and up and up. How did you get the attention of minor league baseball teams the way you have?
It all kind of started with just one team. The Hillsboro Hops were the first ones to reach out because I started just by drawing players. So you can see like my header is a drawing of Mike Trout as a Trout. And then Hillsboro Hops reached out and they're like, hey, can you draw our logo? And they followed me and I was like, sure. And after them, I mean, every time I draw one, it seems like 3 more teams reach out. So I have a never-ending list of teams to draw, but that makes it exciting, and it's a great off-season project.
Well, so this interview is appearing at the end of another interview I did with designer Dan Simon, who actually created the Hillsboro Hops logo. So it's funny that they were the first team to reach out to you. What have you learned about creating logos themselves? Like, what appreciation have you gained for the actual process of creating a logo?
A ton of appreciation. I keep joking around with my friends that I am not an artist and I've never even really been like good at drawing. But I mean, just the process of creating a logo, I've started to develop my own process. The first thing I do is bring in their actual logo and just kind of copy their color palette so I know what I'm working with. And then I get some general shapes down and then just kind of add in detail work and shading as necessary. But, I can kind of just copy the logo or put my own spin on it. So the ability that some of these guys have to create that logo from nothing is insane.
Well, and so I was going to ask you about this actually. You sort of have two different styles of logos that you do. One, like for instance, the one you did for the Storm Chasers, where it's like literally, the Storm Chaser van following a storm cloud, and you've done this sort of adorable little illustration. And then others where you more sort of copy the logo itself, just in your own inimitable style. Like for instance, the one you did for like the Pit Spitters, the Traverse City Pit Spitters, and the Biloxi Chukars, which are just a couple of sort of recent examples. How do you decide whether you're going to put your own spin on it or if you're just going to sort of try to recreate the logo?
Yeah. First of all, I kind of want to take into account what the team wants. Sometimes they say specifically like, oh, can you do our, on-field cap logo? So if they send me something like that, it seems like they kind of want it to stick more close to their actual logo. I personally like the other version of the logo better, just kind of the more literal, fun one.
Right.
But to be honest, I only really do that if something kind of comes to my head. I don't want to force anything there because, like I said, a lot of these logos are great, like especially the Pit Spitters, like they have a great logo. So I'm not trying to force a redesign from MLB Paint when I can just kind of take, their great first logo and redesign it a little bit.
Right. Have you had any interactions with teams that were like less than positive, or players where they're just like, hey, what are you doing with our logo? Like, that's not for you.
Not yet, mostly because I'm still just doing teams that have reached out to me, just because that list got so long. The only person I would say I did a Marcus Snowman drawing, and apparently Marcus Stroman has a tendency to block people if you at him. I didn't get blocked, but when I
Okay.
posted that drawing, a lot of people were like, "Oh, you might get blocked because he doesn't like having random people tag him in photos," which is fair.
Are there any logos that were like particularly hard, or one that you just took longer than you thought it would?
I would say the San Jose Giants one, which
Hmm.
was actually the San Jose Churros. I think
Right.
that's kind of when I turned a corner. Until then, I had kind of just been using a lot of references to, just kind of mimic things in my own style. But that was kind of the first one that I saw it in my head and had to put it on paper. So that was kind of difficult for me. And also, I've never tried to draw like a churro before. So that, some shading was difficult there. But I would say kind of the most high pressure logos are the ones for the White Sox affiliates because I'm a huge White Sox fan, so I really want to deliver on them. And a little sneak peek, we have the Cannon Ballers one coming up, and I'm really proud of how that turned out. So
The Cannon Ballers, another Dan Simon logo, by the way. So have you gotten familiar with sort of the different design firms out there, and like Brandiose is a big one, obviously, and Dan Simon, who we just talked to, and there's Todd Radom, and there's a ton of firms out there. But are you familiarizing yourself? Like, can you recognize like, oh, that's probably Brandiose, that's probably Dan Simon, that's a different one?
not by name yet, but I can definitely, tell the different styles or tell, oh, this is probably a similar person who did this first one. So
Right.
it's pretty
Right.
cool to see, I'm also learning how many baseball teams are out there. I mean, obviously I knew about all of the minor league teams, but you got the Appalachian League and the Atlantic League and all these independent like summer ball teams that are reaching out for me too. And it's really cool for me to see some of these teams that I've never even heard of.
Well, I've been writing about minor league baseball team names and logos since 2014, and I'm not running out of ideas. So
Yeah.
I think you've got some time yet. You mentioned you're a student at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and you said that you don't consider yourself an artist, although that's, we could have a whole conversation about that. I definitely think you're an artist. Well, what is your area of interest? What are you studying?
I am actually a senior in civil engineering, so complete other side of the world there.
Hey, there's a whole right brain, left brain thing going on here, obviously. So, well, normally this is where I would ask people, ask you to tell people where they can find you on social media. But I think everyone knows it's at MLB_paint. And if you're not already following Zach on Twitter, And Instagram, you absolutely should be, because it's, you know, it's such a fun twist on and such a fun interpretation on minor league baseball logos. And Zach, I appreciate you getting up early and talking to me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
We will see you online.
Sounds good.